I should have known something was off when Randall called me out of the blue like that. My uncle wasn't the type to reach out. Hell, I hadn't heard from him in maybe 3 years, not since my dad's funeral. So when his name showed up on my phone that Tuesday morning, I almost didn't answer. "Marvin." His voice sounded the same, gruff, no nonsense. "I need you to come up to the farm." I was sitting in my apartment staring at another rejection email from another job I wouldn't get. "What's going on?" "Can't explain over the phone. How soon can you get here?" "Randall, I don't even know where you live anymore. Somewhere up north, right? I'll text you the address. Pack for a few weeks." A few weeks? I had maybe $200 in my checking account and nothing keeping me in town except a lease I couldn't afford anyway. "What kind of work we talking about?" "Farm sitting. I've got to go out of town for a while. Need someone to watch the place." The line went quiet. I could hear something in the background, wind maybe, or static. "Marvin, you there?" "Yeah, I'm here. What's the pay?" $500 a week plus room and board. $500 a week to watch an empty farm. I'd been making less than that at the hardware store before they laid me off. "When do you need me?" "Today. I'll explain everything when you get here." The call ended before I could ask anything else. I packed what little I had into 2 duffel bags and threw them in the back of my Honda. The address Randall texted led me north on Highway 12, then onto smaller roads that wound up into the mountains. The kind of roads where you didn't pass another car for 20 minutes at a stretch. My phone lost signal about an hour into the drive. The Honda wheezed on the steeper climbs. I'd bought it for $800 6 months ago, and it showed every mile. The engine knocked when I pushed it too hard, and the radio only picked up static up here. I rolled the windows down and listened to the sound of gravel under the tires. The road got narrower as I climbed higher. Pine trees pressed in on both sides, thick enough that I couldn't see more than a few feet into the woods. Every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of the valley below through a gap in the trees. But mostly it was just green and shadow. I started to wonder if I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere when I saw the mailbox. Plain black metal with gray painted in white letters. A dirt driveway disappeared into the trees beyond it. The driveway was longer than I expected, maybe half a mile of ruts and potholes that made the Honda bounce and scrape. When I finally came around the last curve, I saw the farmhouse sitting in a clearing maybe 2 acres wide. It wasn't much to look at. 2 stories, white clapboard siding that needed paint, a wraparound porch with a sagging roof. A red barn sat about 50 yards to the left, and I could see a pasture beyond that with black and white cows scattered across it. The whole place had that worn-down look that comes from too much weather and not enough money. Randall was waiting on the porch when I pulled up. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone completely gray and his face had more lines in it. But he still had that same solid build, like he could work all day without breaking a sweat. He wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "Made good time," he said as I got out of the car. "GPS took me on some interesting back roads." I grabbed my bags from the trunk. "Nice place." Randall grunted. "It serves its purpose. Come on, I'll show you around inside." The front door opened into a living room that felt smaller than it looked from outside. Dark wood furniture, a stone fireplace, and windows that didn't let in much light through the pine trees. The whole place smelled like coffee and old wood. "Kitchen's through here," Randall said, leading me past a staircase. "Bathrooms upstairs along with 2 bedrooms. You can take the one on the left." The kitchen was basic. White appliances that had seen better days, a round table with 2 chairs, and a window that looked out toward the barn. Everything was clean but worn. "Not much to it," I said. "Like I said, it serves its purpose." Randall opened a drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Before I show you the rest, you need to read this." He handed me the paper. It was notebook paper, the kind with the blue lines, and someone had written on it in black ink. The handwriting was careful, like whoever wrote it wanted to make sure every word was clear. I unfolded it and read. "Rules 1. Do not go outside between sunset and sunrise. 2. Keep all doors and windows locked after dark. 3. If you hear knocking after 10 p.m., do not answer. Do not look outside. 4. Feed the cows every morning at 7 a.m. Count them. There should be 12. 5. If you count 13 cows, do not feed them. Come back to the house immediately. I read it twice. What is this? Rules. Randall's voice was flat. You follow them exactly as written. Come on, Randall, what's this really about? He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were gray, same as mine, same as my dad's had been. But there was something in them I hadn't seen before. Something that made me stop asking questions. These aren't suggestions, Marvin. Your life depends on following them exactly as they're written. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. My life depends on it? Yes. I looked at the paper again. 13 cows? You just said there were 12. There are 12. Count them every morning when you feed them. If you ever count 13, you don't feed them. You come straight back to the house and wait until the next day. What happens if I count 13? Randall didn't answer. He took the paper from my hands and folded it again. Keep this with you. Read it every night before bed. Randall, what the hell is going on here? You want the job or not? I needed the money. $500 a week was more than I'd made in a month at any job I'd had, and it wasn't like I had anywhere else to go. Yeah, I want the job. Good. Let me show you the daily routine. We walked outside to the barn. The cows were spread across the pasture, mostly black with white patches. They looked normal enough. I counted them as we walked. 12, just like Randall had said. Feeds in the barn, he said, sliding open the big door. 2 scoops per cow, morning and evening. Water troughs are automatic, but check them anyway. Sometimes the lines freeze. Inside the barn, it smelled like hay and manure. Normal farm smells. Randall showed me where the feed was stored, how much to give them, where to find the tools if I needed to fix anything. Gardens behind the house, he said as we walked back. Tomatoes, corn, beans. Water it if we don't get rain for more than 3 days. Harvest whatever's ready. How long you going to be gone? Month, maybe 2. Depends. Depends on what? But Randall was already walking toward the house. I followed him inside and he went straight upstairs. When he came back down, he was carrying a brown suitcase. My truck's parked behind the barn, he said. Keys are on the kitchen counter if you need to go to town for anything. Nearest grocery store is about 20 minutes down the mountain. Wait, you're leaving now? I've got to catch a flight tonight. He headed for the front door. Remember the rules, Marvin. Follow them exactly. Randall, hold on a second. But he was already outside, walking toward the barn. I heard a truck engine start up, and a minute later, a blue pickup came around from behind the barn. Randall didn't wave. He just drove down the driveway and disappeared into the trees. I stood on the porch, listening to the engine fade away. The silence that followed was complete. No traffic, no neighbors, no sounds except wind in the trees and the distant lowing of cattle. I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and read the rules again. They still didn't make any sense. I guess I thought the rules were just Randall being paranoid. The first 3 days went by without anything weird happening. I kept busy with the farm work, fixing things that needed fixing, checking on the cows, watering the garden. Normal stuff. I'd worked farms before, and this felt like any other job except for the pay being better and the location more isolated. I didn't think much about sunset those first few nights. Back home, I'd always worked until the job was done, not until some arbitrary time on a clock. So when the sun started going down, I just kept working. Had a broken gate latch to fix, then some loose boards on the chicken coop that needed nailing down. The kind of work that takes however long it takes. I'd read those rules each night like Randall told me to, but they seemed like the paranoid ramblings of an old man who'd been alone too long. Don't go outside after dark? I'd been going outside after dark my whole life. Lock all the doors and windows? This was the middle of nowhere. Who was going to break in? A raccoon. The third night, I stayed out until almost 10, working on a section of fence near the pasture. Used my phone's flashlight to see what I was doing. The cows watched me from about 20 feet away, just standing there chewing and looking bored. Normal cow behavior. I went to bed each night thinking Randall had wasted his time writing down a bunch of nonsense. Maybe he'd had some break-ins years ago and never got over it. Maybe he'd watched too many horror movies. Either way, nothing happened those first 3 nights except me getting the farm in better shape than it had probably been in years. The 4th day started the same. I fed the cows at 7, counted 12 like always, then spent the morning working in the garden. The tomatoes needed staking, and there were weeds everywhere. After lunch, I decided to tackle the broken fence rail in the barn I'd been putting off. The rail had snapped clean through, probably from one of the cows leaning against it too hard. I needed to cut a new piece of wood to fit, then bolt it in place. Simple job, but it required measuring twice and cutting once. Like my dad always said, the kind of work you don't rush. I got started around 3 in the afternoon. The barn stayed cool even when it was hot outside, and I had good light coming through the big doors I'd propped open. I measured the gap, marked my cuts, and started working with the handsaw. The rhythmic motion felt good, honest work. Time moves different when you're focused on something. I'd measure, cut, test the fit, then trim a little more. The wood was old and hard, and the saw moved slow through it. I stopped a couple times to sharpen the blade and wipe the sweat off my hands. I was so focused on getting the rail to fit exactly right that I didn't notice when the light coming through the barn doors started getting dimmer. Didn't notice the shadows getting longer. I just kept working, determined to finish the job. It wasn't until I looked up to rest my arms that I realized the sun had gone down. The barn doors showed nothing but darkness outside. Complete darkness. The kind you only get in places without streetlights or house lights or any lights at all. I checked my phone. 8:45. I'd been working in the dark for at least an hour, using just the weak overhead bulb in the barn. Hadn't even noticed. That's when I heard it. A low moaning sound coming from somewhere in the woods. Not like an animal in pain, but deeper than that. Longer. It rose and fell like wind, but there wasn't any wind. The air was completely still. I stopped moving and listened. The sound came again, from a different direction this time. Still that same low moan, but definitely from the woods on the other side of the barn. My hands were still holding the fence rail I'd been fitting into place. I set it down carefully, trying not to make noise. The moaning sound came a 3rd time, and now it seemed closer. Not right outside the barn, but closer than before. That's when I remembered the first rule. Do not go outside between sunset and sunrise. I'd been outside for almost an hour after sunset. The moaning came again, and this time I heard something else with it. Footsteps, heavy ones, moving through the woods. Not the quick light steps of a deer or the shuffling of a raccoon. These sounded deliberate, slow, like something big was walking between the trees, taking its time. The footsteps circled around toward the front of the barn. I could track their movement by the sound of branches breaking and leaves rustling. Whatever was making them wasn't trying to be quiet. I looked at the tools scattered around me. Hand saw, hammer, box of bolts, measuring tape. None of them seemed like much protection against whatever was walking around outside. The barn doors were wide open, and I was standing right in the light where anything outside could see me. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. No moaning, no footsteps, no sound at all except my own heartbeat in my ears. Then I heard them again, but closer. Much closer. Right outside the barn doors. I grabbed my tools as quietly as I could and stuffed them in the toolbox. My hands were shaking, and I dropped the hammer twice before getting it inside. The sound echoed in the barn like a gunshot. The footsteps started moving again. They were circling the barn now, slow and deliberate. I could hear them moving along the side wall, then around to the back, then along the other side. Whatever was out there was taking its time, walking all the way around the building. I thought about the second rule: keep all doors and windows locked after dark. The barn doors were wide open. I was standing in a pool of light that could be seen from anywhere in the woods. And something was walking around outside, taking its time, maybe deciding what to do next. I turned off the overhead light. The barn went completely dark, and I had to feel my way toward the doors. I bumped into a hay bale and nearly tripped over a bucket, but I made it to the front of the barn. The footsteps had stopped again. I peered around the edge of the door frame and looked outside. At first, I couldn't see anything except darkness. Then my eyes started to adjust, and I could make out the shape of trees against the slightly lighter sky. That's when I saw them moving. Dark shapes between the trees, taller than they should be, and wrong somehow. Too angular. They moved like they were walking upright, but they were too tall to be people, and the wrong shape to be bears. One of them stepped out from behind a tree about 50 feet away. It stood there for a moment, and I could see it was looking toward the barn, looking toward me. I pulled my head back and pressed myself against the inside wall of the barn. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. The footsteps started again, but faster now. They were coming toward the barn. I grabbed the barn doors and pulled them closed as quietly as I could. The hinges creaked, but I got them shut and dropped the wooden bar across them. It wouldn't stop anything determined to get in. But it was better than nothing. The footsteps reached the barn doors and stopped right outside. I backed away from the doors and tried to control my breathing. The toolbox was still in my hands, and I set it down carefully. Then I heard scratching. Something was dragging claws or fingernails down the outside of the barn doors. I needed to get to the house. There was a back door to the barn that led to a small equipment yard. I felt my way through the darkness, moving between hay bales and farm equipment, trying not to bump into anything. The scratching at the front doors continued, joined by that low moaning sound. I found the back door and eased it open. The equipment yard was empty, just some old machinery and a pile of lumber. Beyond that was open ground between the barn and the house. Maybe 60 feet of nothing but grass. I could see the house clearly. Randall had left the porch light on, and it looked warm and safe and very far away. The scratching stopped. I listened for the footsteps, trying to figure out where they'd gone. Nothing. The silence was worse than the noise had been. I took a deep breath and ran. 60 feet had never felt so long. I sprinted across the open ground, expecting to hear footsteps behind me or feel something grab me from the darkness. The porch light got bigger and brighter, and then I was at the kitchen door, fumbling with the handle. It was locked. I'd locked it when I left for the barn, following habit more than thinking about it. Now I couldn't get in, and I could hear footsteps again, coming around the side of the house. I dug the key out of my pocket and got the door open just as something large moved past the corner of my vision. I slammed the door behind me and turned the deadbolt, then ran through the house, checking every window and door. All locked. I'd done that much right, at least. I went to the kitchen window and looked out toward the barn. At first, I didn't see anything. Then shapes moved between the trees again, tall and wrong, and definitely not any animal I could name. They stayed in the tree line, just dark silhouettes against the slightly lighter sky. I watched for maybe an hour before they disappeared back into the woods. Then I sat at the kitchen table and read those rules again, understanding for the first time that Randall hadn't been paranoid at all. When morning came, I went out to check the barn. The wooden siding next to the main doors was gouged with deep scratches, like something with very long claws had tried to tear its way inside. I made sure to finish everything before dark this time. The cows were fed, watered, and locked in the barn by 6:30. I'd checked the latch twice, tested the door to make sure it wouldn't budge, and even walked around the whole building looking for gaps or weak spots. Nothing was getting in or out of that barn without a key. The rules were starting to make sense now. Not the why of it, but the importance of following them exactly. I'd learned that lesson 3 nights ago when I'd worked past sunset and heard things moving in the woods, things that left claw marks on the barn siding. I ate a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers, then sat at the kitchen table reading a paperback I'd found on the living room shelf. Some old western about cattle rustlers. The irony wasn't lost on me, sitting here guarding livestock from whatever lived in these mountains. Around 10:30, I went upstairs and got ready for bed. My room faced the barn and pasture, which I'd started thinking of as an advantage. I could keep an eye on things without going outside. The window gave me a clear view of the barn doors and most of the fenced area. I pulled the curtains closed and settled into bed with the book. The house was quiet except for the usual settling sounds and wind in the trees. Normal sounds that didn't make my skin crawl anymore. Sleep came easier than it had the first week. My body had adjusted to the physical work and the mountain air. Even my mind had started to accept the strangeness of this place. I was learning to live with rules I didn't understand, in a world that operated by different logic than anything I'd known before. But something woke me around midnight. A sound that didn't belong. Not the moaning from the woods or heavy footsteps that had terrified me before. This was closer, familiar but wrong somehow. The creak of hinges, metal on metal, slow and deliberate. I lay still for a moment, listening. The sound came again, longer this time, like a door swinging open. The barn door. I sat up and pushed the curtains aside just enough to peer out. The barn sat 60 feet away, a dark rectangle against the slightly lighter sky. But something was different about its shape. The doors that should have been closed and latched were standing wide open. That wasn't possible. I'd locked them myself, tested the latch, made sure everything was secure. Then I saw movement in the darkness beyond the barn doors. A pale shape emerging from the black interior. Then another, and another. The cows were walking out of the barn. I pressed my face closer to the glass, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. All 12 of them moved in a slow, steady line through the open doors and into the pasture. But they weren't wandering randomly like cattle do when they escape. They moved with purpose, each one following the exact path of the one before it. They walked in perfect formation across the pasture toward the far fence line, not hurrying, not stopping to graze, just walking in a straight line like soldiers on parade. I'd never seen cows behave like that. Cattle are herd animals, sure, but they don't move in formation. They mill around. Some go left, some go right. Some stop to eat grass. They don't march. But these 12 were marching. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and headed for the door. Whatever was happening out there, I needed to get those cows back in the barn before something in the woods got to them. My hand was on the doorknob when I stopped. The rules. Rule number 2, specifically. I couldn't remember the exact wording, but it was something about not going outside after dark. And there'd been something else. Something about the cows. I went back to the bed and found the folded paper in my jeans pocket. My hands shook a little as I opened it and read by flashlight. Rule number 4. Feed the cows every morning at 7 a.m. and count them. There should be 12. Rule number 5. If you count 13 cows, do not feed them and return to the house immediately. But nothing about what to do if they got out at night. Nothing about whether I should go after them or let them wander. Then I read rule number 1 again. Do not go outside between sunset and sunrise. No exceptions listed. No emergency clauses. Just don't go outside. I folded the paper and went back to the window. The cows had reached the fence line at the far end of the pasture, maybe 100 yards from the house. They stood there in their perfect line, all facing the same direction, facing the woods. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see what they were looking at. The tree line was just a black wall from this distance, but something was different about one section of it. A gap between two large pines where the darkness seemed deeper. And in that gap, something moved. It was too far away to make out details, but I could see it was tall. Much taller than a person. It stood upright, but its proportions were wrong somehow. Too thin in some places, too wide in others. Like someone had taken a human shape and stretched it in random directions. The figure raised what might have been an arm, and the cows began moving again. Not toward the barn, toward the woods. They walked in their same perfect formation, following the fence line until they reached the gate that led to the dirt road. The gate that I knew was latched and secured because I'd checked it myself that afternoon. But as the first cow approached it, the gate swung open. I watched 12 cows walk through that gate in single file and disappear into the woods. The tall figure waited until the last one passed, then melted back into the shadows between the trees. The gate swung shut behind them. I stood at the window for another hour, waiting for something else to happen, waiting for the cows to come back, or for more sounds from the woods, or for that thing to reappear. But the night went quiet again. Even the wind died down, leaving nothing but silence and an empty pasture. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the chair by the window, flashlight in my lap, watching the barn doors that hung open like a mouth, wondering how a locked latch had opened by itself, wondering what that thing in the woods wanted with Randall's cattle, wondering if I'd still have a job when Randall came back and found his livestock gone. When the sun finally came up around 6:30, I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the empty pasture. The barn doors were still open, the gate still closed. No sign of the cows anywhere. I was trying to figure out how to explain this to Randall when I heard a sound that made me spill hot coffee on my hand. The barn door was creaking again. I looked out the window and saw them walking back through the open doors. All 12 cows, moving in that same unnatural formation. They filed into the barn one by one, then settled into their usual spots as if nothing had happened. By 7 a.m., when I went out to do the morning feeding, they were all there. I counted twice to be sure. 12 cows, all accounted for, chewing hay and looking at me with those placid bovine expressions that gave away nothing. The barn door latch was secure and locked, just like I'd left it the night before. I'd been working in the garden for about an hour when I saw it. The deer stood at the tree line, maybe 30 feet away, right where the cleared ground met the pine forest. Nothing unusual about that, I thought at first. Deer wandered through this property all the time, but this one didn't move. I straightened up from the tomato plants I'd been weeding and wiped my hands on my jeans. The deer just stood there, looking at me. Not the quick, nervous glances deer usually gave before bolting. This was different. It stared right at me with those black eyes, head turned in my direction, ears forward. I waited for it to run. That's what deer do when they spot people. They freeze for maybe a second, then bound away through the trees with those white tails flicking. But this one stayed put. The longer I looked at it, the more wrong it seemed. The animal stood perfectly still, like a statue. No ear twitching, no head movement, no shifting weight from one leg to another. Just that steady, unblinking stare. My skin started to crawl. I'd seen plenty of deer in my life. They're skittish creatures, always ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. They don't stand around staring at humans. They sure don't hold eye contact for more than a few seconds. This one had been watching me for at least 2 minutes now. I took a step to the left, moving along the garden row. The deer's head turned, following my movement. Those black eyes never left my face. The rest of its body stayed motionless, but its neck rotated to track me. That's when I remembered the rules. I'd read them so many times now that I had them memorized, but one rule I'd pushed to the back of my mind. Rule number 3. The one that seemed the most random, the most out of place with the others. If you see a deer on the property during daylight hours, shoot it immediately. At the time, it hadn't made much sense. Deer were harmless. Why would Randall want them killed? I'd figured maybe they damaged his crops or something. Country people had different relationships with wildlife than city folks did. But looking at this deer now, with its unnatural stillness and that penetrating stare, the rule didn't seem random anymore. I started backing toward the house, moving slowly and keeping my eyes on the animal. Each step I took, its head turned a little more to follow me. The black eyes never wavered, never blinked that I could see. The rifle hung above the fireplace in the living room. Randall had shown it to me on that first day, along with the box of ammunition in the kitchen drawer. He'd said I might need it for predators or sick animals. I'd nodded and figured I'd probably never touch the thing. My back hit the porch steps. I fumbled behind me for the railing, still watching the deer. It watched me back. When I reached the kitchen door, I had to turn around to get my key out, and for those few seconds when I couldn't see the animal, my hands shook. The lock turned. I pushed inside and went straight to the living room. The rifle was a bolt-action hunting rifle, nothing fancy but well-maintained. I'd handled guns before, though not often. My dad had taken me hunting a few times when I was younger. The basics came back to me as I lifted it down from the hooks. In the kitchen, I found the ammunition box in the drawer next to the sink. My hands were steadier now that I had something to do, a plan to follow. I loaded 3 rounds into the magazine, worked the bolt to chamber 1, and clicked the safety off. The whole process took maybe 2 minutes. I went back outside, expecting to find an empty tree line. Hoping for it, actually. Maybe the deer had wandered off while I was inside. Maybe I'd imagined how wrong it looked. Maybe this was all just paranoia from spending too much time alone on this isolated farm. But the deer hadn't moved. It stood in exactly the same spot, in exactly the same position. Head turned toward the house now, those black eyes fixed on me as I came down the porch steps with the rifle. I walked back toward the garden, keeping the gun pointed down but ready. The deer's gaze followed me. When I stopped about 20 feet away, we stared at each other across the cleared ground. Up close, I could see more details that bothered me. Its coat was the right color, brown with white markings. Its size looked normal for a whitetail doe. The shape was right. But something about the proportions seemed off in a way I couldn't put my finger on. And those eyes were too dark, too deep, like looking into wells. "Go on," I said out loud. "Get out of here." The deer didn't react to my voice, didn't even twitch an ear. I raised the rifle and sighted down the barrel. The deer's chest filled the scope. At this range, I couldn't miss, but I hesitated, finger on the trigger. It was just standing there, not threatening me, not charging, not showing any aggression, just watching. Maybe it was sick, maybe it was confused, maybe there was a perfectly normal explanation for its behavior. But the rule was clear. Shoot any deer on sight. Randall had written those rules for a reason. Everything else on that paper had turned out to be necessary. The creatures in the woods, the midnight visits, the barn doors opening by themselves. All of it real. If Randall said to shoot deer on sight, there was a reason for that too. I took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against my shoulder. The shot echoed across the clearing and bounced off the trees. Birds scattered from the branches, wings beating frantically as they took flight. I'd aimed for the chest, center mass, an easy shot at 20 feet. The bullet should have dropped the deer instantly, but the deer didn't fall. Instead, it started to dissolve. The brown fur turned black, then gray, then transparent. The solid shape of the animal began to break apart, like smoke caught in a strong wind. The edges blurred first, then the whole body started coming apart in wisps and tendrils. Within seconds, there was nothing left but dark smoke drifting between the trees. The wind caught it and scattered it, pulling the last traces apart until they disappeared completely. No blood on the ground, no body, no sign that anything had ever stood there. I lowered the rifle and stared at the empty space where the deer had been. I went back to the house and set the rifle against the wall next to the kitchen door. My hands were still shaking a little from what I'd just seen, or what I thought I'd seen. The deer that wasn't really a deer. I made myself a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter, looking out the window at the spot where the thing had been. Nothing there now except grass and the edge of the garden. No sign anything had ever happened. The afternoon stretched out quiet and normal. I finished the weeding I'd started before the deer showed up, checked on the cows, and fixed a loose board on the porch steps. Regular farm work. The kind of stuff that made sense. By evening, I had the cows secured in the barn again. All 12 of them counted twice. I made dinner and sat at the kitchen table with another one of those Western paperbacks, reading about cowboys and cattle drives. Simple stories where the good guys wore white hats and the bad guys were just men with guns. I went to bed around 10:30 and slept better than I expected. Maybe shooting that thing had settled something in my mind. Maybe I was getting used to this place and its weird rules. The next day started normal. Fed the cows at 7, worked in the garden, ate lunch. The sun was warm and there was a nice breeze coming down from the mountains. I'd finished my chores early, so around 2 in the afternoon I decided to sit on the front porch for a while. I pulled one of the wooden chairs over to face the yard and the tree line beyond. It felt good to just sit and not be working on something. The cows were grazing peacefully in their pasture. Birds were singing in the pines. Everything looked normal and quiet. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, letting the sun warm my face. This was the first time since I'd arrived that I felt like I could actually relax. Even with all the strange rules and the things I'd seen, there was something peaceful about this place during the day. That's when I heard the whistling. It came from the woods, somewhere in the trees to my left. A clear, cheerful melody that sounded familiar. Something simple and happy. The kind of tune you might hear kids singing at a playground. It had that innocent, carefree quality that made you want to smile. I opened my eyes and looked toward the sound, but I couldn't see anything through the trees, just the melody floating out of the woods, note after note in perfect rhythm. It was actually pretty. Reminded me of songs my mom used to hum when I was little. Without really thinking about it, I started whistling along. The melody was easy to follow, and I found myself matching it note for note. My lips pursed automatically and the tune came out clear and strong. It felt natural, like singing along with a song on the radio. The kind of thing you do without deciding to do it. For maybe 30 seconds, we whistled together. Me on the porch and whoever was in the woods, creating this little duet across the clearing. The harmony was nice, made the whole place feel friendly and welcoming. Then the whistling from the woods stopped. Just cut off mid-note like someone had flipped a switch. The silence hit me like a slap, and suddenly my blood went cold. Something was very wrong with what had just happened. I sat forward in the chair, my own whistling dying in my throat. The quiet felt heavy now, loaded with something I couldn't name. All the peaceful feelings from a minute ago vanished, replaced by a growing sense of dread. That's when I remembered. The rules. Randall's handwritten rules that I'd been carrying in my pocket and reading every night. There had been more than the 5 I'd been focusing on. I'd memorized those main ones about staying inside after dark and counting cows and shooting deer, but there were others written below them in smaller text. One of them was about whistling. My hand went to my jeans pocket and I pulled out the folded paper, opening it with fingers that weren't quite steady. I scanned down past the big 5 rules to the additional notes written at the bottom. There it was, in Randall's careful handwriting. If you hear whistling from the woods, you may whistle back. But if the whistling stops suddenly, hide immediately and do not look outside. I read it twice to make sure I understood. You may whistle back. I'd done that part. But if it stops suddenly, it had stopped suddenly, hide immediately. I folded the paper and shoved it back in my pocket, then jumped up from the chair so fast it rocked back and hit the wall. My heart was pounding as I grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. The kitchen felt safe and solid around me as I stepped inside and turned the deadbolt. I could hear my own breathing, quick and shallow. Whatever was about to happen, I didn't want to be outside for it. Do not look outside. That's what the rule said. But I had to know what was coming. I moved to the front window and stood to one side of it, pressing my back against the wall. From there, I could see part of the yard and the tree line without being obvious about it. If something was out there, maybe it wouldn't notice me watching. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Just the normal view of grass and trees and afternoon sunlight. I started to think maybe I was overreacting. Maybe whoever had been whistling was just a hiker who'd moved on. Then I saw movement at the edge of the woods. Something pale stepped out from behind a large pine tree about 50 yards away. At first glance, it looked like a person, roughly human-sized and walking upright. But the way it moved made my skin crawl. It walked like a marionette, like someone was controlling it with strings but didn't quite know how to make it look natural. Each step was too deliberate, too stiff. The arms swung at the wrong rhythm. The head bobbed in a way that didn't match the walking motion, and it was heading straight for the house. I pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to stay out of sight while keeping one eye on the thing approaching across the yard. As it got closer, I could see more details that made everything worse. The pale color wasn't clothes. It was skin. Or something like skin, but wrong. Too smooth, too uniform. Like plastic or wax. And the proportions weren't quite right either. The arms seemed a little too long. The legs a little too short. The head tilted at an angle that would have been uncomfortable for a real person. But the worst part was how it moved. Every few steps it would jerk or pause like someone was adjusting the controls. Sometimes one leg would lift too high or one arm would swing too far. It never found a natural rhythm. The thing reached the middle of the yard and stopped. It stood there for maybe 10 seconds, perfectly still except for that unnatural head tilt. Then it started moving again, but now it was walking in a wide circle around the house. I crept from window to window, staying low and keeping track of where it was. Kitchen window. There it was, passing the barn. Living room window. Moving along the far side of the yard. Back to the kitchen, completing the circle near the garden. It made 3 complete circles around the house, always staying about 30 feet away. Each time it passed a window, I ducked down and held my breath until I was sure it had moved on. The jerky, puppet-like movements never got any more natural. On the 4th circle, it stopped directly in front of the house again, right where I'd been sitting in the chair maybe 20 minutes earlier. From the front window, I watched it stand there motionless. The face was turned toward the house, but I couldn't make out any features from this distance. Just a pale oval where a face should be. It raised one arm and pointed directly at the front door. The movement was sharp and mechanical, like a robot following a programmed command. The arm held that position for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it turned and walked back toward the woods with that same jerky, unnatural gait. I stayed at the window and watched it disappear between the trees. Even after it was gone, I could see branches moving deeper in the woods, tracking its progress as it moved away from the house. The movement got fainter and fainter, until finally the woods went still. I slumped against the wall and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My shirt was soaked with sweat and my legs felt shaky. The whole encounter had probably lasted less than an hour, but it felt like half the day. I went to the kitchen and got a glass of water, drinking it in long gulps while I tried to process what I'd just seen. The whistling had been bait, something to get me to respond, to let whatever that thing was know I was here and paying attention, and I'd fallen for it completely. But the rule had saved me. Hide immediately and do not look outside. Well, I'd hidden. The looking part I'd bent a little, but I'd stayed inside and kept out of sight. That had to count for something. I pulled out the rules paper again and read through all of them, including the smaller notes at the bottom I'd been skipping. There were more than I'd realized. Instructions about things I hadn't encountered yet, warnings about sounds and signs and situations I couldn't even imagine. Randall hadn't been paranoid or crazy. Every single rule on this paper was designed to keep me alive in a place where normal logic didn't apply, where deer dissolved into smoke and pale things walked like broken puppets, and whistling in the woods was never just whistling. I folded the paper carefully and put it back in my pocket. From now on, I was going to follow every rule exactly as written. No more testing them or bending them or assuming I knew better. The rules were keeping me alive. I'd been following the rules for 2 weeks without breaking them once. Every door locked by sunset. Every cow counted twice at morning feeding. The rifle cleaned and ready by the kitchen door. I read through Randall's paper each night before bed, memorizing every word until I could recite them in my sleep. The routine kept me sane. Wake up at 6:30, feed the cows at 7, work the garden or fix something around the property until afternoon, secure everything by sunset, eat dinner, read until bedtime. Simple, predictable, safe. I'd stopped questioning why the rules existed. The deer that dissolved into smoke taught me that. The pale thing with its puppet movements taught me that. Whatever lived in these woods didn't follow normal rules, so I had to follow different ones. It was working. Nothing had tried to get into the house since that first night in the barn. No more creatures at the tree line. No more midnight visits from things that looked wrong. I was getting good at this. That's probably why I slept so deeply when the knocking started. The sound pulled me out of a dreamless sleep like a hand shaking my shoulder. 3 sharp raps on wood, then a pause, then 3 more. I sat up in bed and checked my phone. 2:37 in the morning. More knocking. Steady, urgent, but not frantic. The kind of knocking that said someone needed help, but wasn't panicking yet. "Marvin!" The voice came through the front door clear as day. "Marvin, it's me. I need to get inside." I knew that voice. I'd been hearing it in my head for 2 weeks, remembering the last conversation we'd had in this kitchen. Randall's voice, rough from years of smoking, with that particular way he had of making every sentence sound like an order. Relief hit me like cold water. He was back. Whatever business had taken him away was finished, and he was home. I wouldn't have to handle this place alone anymore. Someone who understood the rules, who knew how to deal with whatever lived in these woods, was standing right outside the door. I swung my legs out of bed and grabbed my jeans from the floor. My hands shook a little as I pulled them on. 2 weeks of isolation and supernatural encounters had wound me tighter than I'd realized. Having Randall back meant I could finally relax. "Marvin, come on, open up. It's cold out here." I hurried down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the wooden steps. The knocking came again, more insistent now. 3 raps, pause. 3 raps. Like a code, but not urgent enough to be an emergency. "I'm coming," I called out, reaching for the deadbolt on the front door. My hand stopped an inch from the lock. Rule 3. The words came back to me as clearly as if I was reading them off the paper right now. If you hear knocking after 10 p.m., do not answer or look outside. No exceptions. No exceptions. I stood there with my hand frozen in the air, staring at the deadbolt. But this was Randall. This was his house, his property, his rules. Surely the rules didn't apply to him. He'd written them. He'd know when it was safe to break them. "Marvin, what's taking so long? Just unlock the door." The voice sounded exactly right. The same tone Randall had used when he'd shown me around the farm, practical and slightly impatient. The same way he'd said my name when he'd handed me the rules paper. But the rule said no exceptions. I stepped back from the door and tried to think. Randall had been gone for 2 weeks. He'd said 1 to 2 months, depending on circumstances. It was possible those circumstances had changed. Maybe he'd finished his business early. Maybe there'd been an emergency that brought him back. The knocking came again, and this time I heard frustration creeping into it. Still controlled, but sharper. "Marvin, I know you're in there. I can see the light upstairs was on. Open the door." I looked up the stairwell. My bedroom light was still on. Of course he could see it from outside. That proved he was really standing on the porch, really looking at the house, not some trick or illusion. I moved toward the door again, then stopped. Something nagged at me, some detail that didn't fit right. The truck. I went to the front window and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The porch light was on, casting a yellow circle that reached about 10 feet into the yard. I could see a figure standing at the door wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, the right height, the right build. From this angle, it looked exactly like Randall, but the driveway was empty. I let the curtain fall back and stared at the door. Randall's truck wasn't there. The blue pickup he'd driven away in 2 weeks ago was nowhere in sight. How had he gotten here without his truck? "Randall?" I called through the door. "Where's your truck?" The knocking stopped. For about 10 seconds there was complete silence. No response, no movement that I could hear. Just the kind of quiet that made my skin crawl. Then the voice came back, but it sounded different. Still Randall's voice, but flatter somehow. Like someone doing an impression who'd forgotten to add the right emotion. "Truck broke down on the main road. Had to walk. Now open the door, I'm freezing out here." That could be true. The dirt road from the highway was rough enough to strand a vehicle, and it was a cold night. But something about the way he'd said it felt wrong, too quick, too rehearsed. "How did you know I'd be here?" I asked. "You said you'd be gone 1 to 2 months. Another pause. Shorter this time, but still long enough to notice. Plans changed. Business finished early. "Marvin, stop asking questions and let me in. This is my house." The voice was definitely different now. Still recognizably Randall's, but missing something essential. Like hearing a recording of someone talking compared to hearing them in person. All the right sounds, but none of the natural rhythm. I backed away from the door and tried to think clearly. Everything I'd learned in the past 2 weeks said not to trust this. The rules existed for a reason. Every single one had proven necessary. The deer that looked normal but dissolved into smoke. The whistling that sounded innocent but was bait. The pale thing that moved like a broken puppet. What if this was the same kind of trap? The knocking started again, harder this time. Not quite pounding, but close to it. "Marvin." The voice was getting sharper, losing more of its natural quality with each word. "Open this door right now. I'm not going to stand out here all night." I went back to the window and looked out again. The figure was still there. Still wearing Randall's clothes. Still the right size and shape. But now that I was really paying attention, something about the way it stood seemed off. Too straight, maybe. Randall had a slight stoop from years of farm work, but this figure's posture was perfectly vertical. "If you're really Randall," I called through the door, "tell me something only he would know." The knocking stopped again. This time the silence stretched longer, maybe 30 seconds. When the voice came back, it had changed again. Still recognizably the same voice, but with an odd echo to it now, like someone talking from the bottom of a well. "I gave you rules, 5 rules. You're supposed to follow them." That proved nothing. Anyone who'd been watching the house could have figured out there were rules. The way I behaved, the way I secured everything at sunset, the way I never went outside after dark. It would be obvious to anything intelligent enough to observe. "What was the first thing you showed me when I got here?" I asked. Another long pause. When the answer came, the voice had deteriorated further. The words were still clear, but they sounded mechanical now, like someone reading from a script they didn't understand. "The house. I showed you the house." Wrong. The first thing Randall had shown me was the cows. We'd walked to the pasture before going inside. He'd pointed them out and told me there should always be 12. "You're not Randall," I said through the door. The knocking stopped completely. I stood in the dark living room, listening to my own heartbeat and the old house creaking around me. Outside, there was no sound at all. No footsteps, no movement, no response to what I'd said. Then the voice came back one more time, and now it barely sounded human. The words were stretched and distorted, like a recording being played at the wrong speed. "Let me in, Marvin. Let me in, let me in, let me in." The knocking resumed, but it wasn't rhythmic anymore. Just random pounding, sometimes soft, sometimes hard, with no pattern or purpose. And underneath it, I could hear something else. A scraping sound like fingernails dragging across wood. I grabbed the rifle from beside the kitchen door and checked that it was loaded. Then I went back to the living room and sat in the chair farthest from any window, pointing the gun toward the front door. The pounding and scraping continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes the voice would call my name, but it kept getting less and less recognizable. By the end, it sounded like wind blowing through a broken pipe, making sounds that might have been words if you didn't listen too closely. I never looked outside again. I just sat in that chair, holding the rifle, watching the front door, and waiting for whatever was out there to give up. Finally, around 4 in the morning, the sounds stopped. I waited another hour before I got up and crept to the front window. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. There was no sign that anything had been there at all. Except when I looked closely at the front door, I could see new scratches in the wood around the lock, deep gouges that hadn't been there yesterday, like something with claws had been trying to dig its way through. I went back to the kitchen and pulled out Randall's rules, read through them again by the light of my phone. Rule 3 was clear. If you hear knocking after 10 p.m., do not answer or look outside. No exceptions. No exceptions meant no exceptions. Not even for voices I recognized. Not even for people who should have every right to be here. I watched through the kitchen window as the sky started to lighten. Whatever had been pretending to be Randall was gone now, dissolved back into shadow like the fake deer had dissolved into smoke. The rules had saved me again. I found Randall's number in my phone and called him at 7 the next morning. My hands still shook a little as I dialed. He picked up on the second ring. "Marvin, you all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine, but something happened last night." I told him about the knocking, the voice that sounded exactly like him, the questions I'd asked to test it. "Good," he said when I finished. "You did exactly right. That thing's been trying that trick for years. Gets the voice perfect, but it can't get the details right." "Where are you, really?" "Denver. Been here 4 days now. Won't be back for another 2 months, maybe 3. I sat down at the kitchen table. "So that really wasn't you?" "Hell no. And if you'd opened that door, you'd be gone right now, just like the last guy who tried to help me with this place." That stopped me cold. What happened to him? Doesn't matter now. Point is, you followed the rules. That's what keeps you breathing out there. We talked for another 10 minutes. He asked about the cows, the garden, whether I'd had any other problems. I told him about the deer that dissolved into smoke, the pale figure that circled the house. He just grunted like he expected all of it. "You're doing good, Marvin. Keep following those rules exactly like they're written. Don't get creative, don't try to improve them. They work because people before us figured out what works." After I hung up, I made coffee and sat on the porch in the morning sun, The scratches around the front door lock caught the light. Deep gouges in the wood, like something had tried to claw its way through. But I was still here, still breathing. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Strange things happened regularly now, but I knew how to handle them. More deer that weren't deer appeared at the tree line. I shot them all, watched them dissolve into smoke. The pale figure came back twice, circling the house when I made noise during the day. I hid inside until it left. Things knocked on the doors and windows almost every week. Sometimes it sounded like Randall, sometimes like my father, once like my ex-girlfriend Sarah asking me to let her in from the cold. I never answered, never looked outside after 10 p.m. no matter what I heard. The cows disappeared 3 more times, marching out in formation to meet something in the woods. They always came back by morning, acting normal. I stopped worrying about it and just counted them each day. 12 every time. I found more rules written in pencil on the back of Randall's paper. Small notes about things I hadn't encountered yet. What to do if the barn doors wouldn't open. How to handle voices coming from the basement. What it meant if the cows started walking backward. Each rule felt like a gift from someone who'd survived something I might face. The garden produced more vegetables than I could eat. Tomatoes the size of softballs, corn that grew 7 feet tall, beans that kept producing until the first frost. I canned what I could using jars I found in the basement, following instructions from a cookbook on the kitchen shelf. October brought cold mornings and early sunsets. I adjusted my routine, finishing all outdoor work by 5 p.m. instead of 6. The creatures in the woods seemed more active as the days shortened. I heard them moving around the property earlier each night, testing doors and windows, calling my name in voices I recognized. But the rules held. Every single time. I started sleeping better. Not because the sounds stopped, but because I trusted the locked doors and drawn curtains. The rules weren't just instructions anymore. They were armor. Randall called every 2 weeks to check on me. He sounded surprised each time when I answered the phone. Still there, huh? Still here. Good. Most people don't make it past the first month. The rules work. Damn right they do. In November, I realized I'd stopped questioning why things happened. The deer that dissolved into smoke, the figures that walked like broken puppets, the voices that mimicked people I knew. They were just part of this place. Like weather or seasons. You didn't argue with winter, you dressed warm and waited for spring. I learned to read the signs. When the birds went quiet, something was watching from the woods. When the cows clustered together in the far corner of the pasture, something would try the doors that night. When the wind stopped completely, I made sure everything was locked twice. The strangest part was how normal it all became. I'd feed the cows, tend the garden, repair whatever needed fixing, then secure everything before dark. Cook dinner, read a book, go to bed. If something knocked or called my name, I ignored it. If something moved past the windows, I didn't look. Simple as that. By Thanksgiving, I could tell the difference between regular animal sounds and the other things. Real owls hooted in patterns. The fake ones just repeated the same 3 notes over and over. Real wind moved through trees in waves. The other kind of wind came from one direction and stopped too suddenly. December brought snow and shorter days. I chopped firewood and kept the stove burning. The creatures seemed less active in the cold, but they never stopped completely. They just changed tactics. Ice would form on windows in strange patterns, like fingers pressed against glass. Footprints appeared in fresh snow, leading to the house but never away from it. I swept them clean each morning and didn't think about what made them. Randall finally called in mid-December to say he was coming home. You did good, Marvin, better than I expected. When will you be back? Day after tomorrow. You can head out whenever you're ready after that. I looked around the kitchen at the rifle by the door, at the rules paper I kept folded in my shirt pocket now. Okay. You sound different. I thought about that. Maybe I am different. This place changes people. Usually kills them first, but it changes the ones who survive. He was right. I'd arrived here thinking the world worked one way. Now I knew better. Some places had their own rules, their own logic. You could fight it and die or accept it and live. I chose living. Randall's truck came up the driveway on a cold Thursday morning. I watched from the kitchen window as he parked and climbed out, moving slower than I remembered. He looked older, more tired, but it was definitely him. I could tell by the way he walked, the way he checked the barn first before coming to the house. Marvin. He nodded when I opened the door. Randall. We shook hands on the porch. His grip was firm, calloused. Everything look right to you? He asked, scanning the yard. 12 cows, gardens cleaned up for winter, firewood stacked. Had some visitors, but nothing got through. Good. He studied my face. You look like you understand now. I understand the rules work. That's enough. I packed my 2 duffel bags that afternoon while Randall walked the property, checking things I'd maintained, counting his cows, examining the scratches around the doors. He moved like a man returning to a place he knew was dangerous but necessary. When I loaded my bags in the Honda, he handed me an envelope. Your pay, bonus included. I didn't count it, just put it in my jacket pocket. Thanks. You ever need work again, you call me. Not many people can do what you did. I got in my car and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see him standing on the porch, hands in his pockets, watching me like he wasn't sure I'd really leave. But I would leave. I had to. This place wasn't mine. As I drove down the dirt driveway toward the road, I realized something had changed in me that went deeper than just learning rules. I'd learned to accept things I couldn't explain, to trust instructions that saved my life, even when they made no sense. I'd learned that survival sometimes meant following someone else's hard-won wisdom instead of figuring everything out myself. The Honda reached the main road and I turned south, back toward Charleston. In my rearview mirror, Randall's farm disappeared behind trees and hills, but the rules paper stayed in my pocket and the lessons stayed in my head. Some knowledge you carry with you. Some understanding changes how you see everything else.